I was assuming that you would throw to me on Gutierrez and Tennant on geoengineering.
You chose this paper, Frankie. You. You will sum it up.
Tennant pitched it.
I did pitch it.
Yeah.
I did, and I was the decisive vote.
Tennant wants to talk about it.
I should reap the whirlwind.
Very noble of you, too. All right, fine. I'm not bitter.
Clearly. Jeez.
This is Let Me Sum Up, your regular deep dive into recent reports on climate and energy. I'm Luke Menzel, recording on Wurundjeri land, and I'm joined today by my two co-hosts. The latest co-host of the Let Me Sum Up podcast to be sucked into the cosplay vortex, a woman who wowed the crowd by turning up to Chaos Trivia live event last Wednesday, dressed as Dorothy from The Wizard of Oz. It's Frankie Muskovich. Hello, Frankie.
G'day, Luke and Tennant. I have to say there was something, a little liberating, but also I wouldn't call it one-upmanship, but I had to not let you completely upstage me with your fancy outfits. And for those who did happen to make it to trivia, hopefully you saw the most spectacular Dorothy shoes I think that exist on the planet. I think if I did actually try and click my heels 3 times, maybe magical things would happen. Who can say? But anyway, it was fun. 0 regrets, except for maybe a bit of traction on LinkedIn with photos of that. And maybe I was hoping that would remain slightly more low-key.
Are there photos on LinkedIn?
There's at least one. But I'm now that I've said this out
Straight
loud.
to the show notes.
Shit. You'll forget I said that.
One of L. Frank Baum's lesser-known sequels.
Clicking.
The wonderful LinkedIn page of Oz.
Clicking 3 heels right now as we speak. We're going back to 10 seconds ago before I mentioned anything about this.
So as regular listeners know, Frankie is in control of the show notes. And so if this link does not appear, you'll know why. But I can also say that there are actual photos of all of us in cosplay on the Patreon. So run, don't walk, as they say.
That's right. There will not be a link in the show notes to a LinkedIn post. So if you do want to check out not just my beginner cosplay, but the more advanced stylings of Luke and Tennant, you'll have to subscribe to the Patreon.
And we're also joined by a man who, dressed as the Wizard Girl from Baldur's Gate 3, performed many roles at Chaos Trivia, most notably using his 3D printed staff to bestow a blessing on the winning trivia team. It's Tennant Reid. G'day, Tennant.
And some people coming up to get their blessings noted that there were diamantes on my outfit too, but not nearly so many. Also impressive as on Frankie's ruby slippers.
All right. On this week's show, we look at a scientific paper that considers the risks associated with solar geoengineering and oft-discussed break glass in case of emergency strategy for dealing with dangerous climate change. But first, there has been much debate over whether 1.5 is indeed alive, which is why a recent interview from UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres caused such a splash. In it, he says, and I quote, "Let's recognise our failure. The truth is that we have failed to avoid an overshooting above 1.5 degrees in the next few years. We must do everything possible to make that overshoot as short as possible and as low in intensity as possible to avoid tipping points like the Amazon. We don't want to see the Amazon as a savanna. But that's a real risk if we don't change course and if we don't make a dramatic decrease of emissions as soon as possible." Frankie, the Secretary-General's intervention on the status of 1.5 degrees is very consequential, especially heading into COP30, right?
It certainly is. And this transcript that we're sort of referring to as we talk about this is, I think, his only scheduled interview or remarks prior to COP. I think it's significant that he was speaking to an Indigenous journalist from Brazil and talking about, I guess the prospects for Brazil's presidency of the COP and the significance of it being hosted where it is in, at the foothills of the Amazon. if you like, in the lead up to COP. I think the three of us have talked about this moment in time for a little while now. So we know that the question of what happens when we hit 1.5 has been considered. We've talked about it. We've seen coverage from the World Meteorological Organization and, all the credible scientific bodies that track where we're at on a temperature basis. And for the last, year or two, we've seen that we're starting to hit that global average of 1.5, and it depends on, which period you're averaging over. But I think Mr. Gutierrez's point is very provocative in the sense that we're at that threshold now. What I think is interesting, though, is the quick takeaways of some of the media coverage is all the doom and gloom, like, oh, we've hit 1.5, we've failed on that aspect of the Paris Agreement in terms of the goals to avoid or sort of keep temperature as close to or below 1.5 as possible. What he's really saying here is that now we're in a period where we need to accept that there is going to be overshoot. We know in Australia we've been averaging over 1.5 already for the last year or two. Australia experiences a slightly higher temperature increase than other places in the world. So the purpose of his rallying call is really now to say, well, if there needs to be overshoot, we need to double down on efforts in the next few years, because there are significant consequences for waiting too long to act significantly to reduce emissions. And we're seeing that with some of the other scientific analysis out there on what the prospects for this next round of NDCs have for that longer term ambition. And if we wait too long to really put in place ambitious policies, then we could be dealing with a hell of a lot more overshoot that's going to take significantly more effort and action to bring back down. So that's sort of the rallying call. I think the media commentary was a little bit reductive. There's a lot more nuance in what he's saying there. But that, the point on overshoot being inevitable has now been made. And that, we're now going to need to consider other strategies as well. Like we've got to double down on the known things, and that includes, significantly ramped up rollout investment in renewables and energy efficiency and electrification and all the things that we know need to be focused on. But we may well now be in a situation where we need to start thinking about other methods of carbon drawdown, which is why it feels timely that we're talking about the paper that we are today. But what did you guys make of his remarks?
It feels like a big step for the Secretary General, the head of the United Nations, under which the Paris Agreement sits, to acknowledge that it looks like we're going to break through the 1.5 degree average. There's more continuity in what he's saying and not saying so far than people may have thought, because so far, there already was embedded in the bulk of the assessment scenarios or scenarios for climate change assessed in the IPCC process. There was already some degree of overshoot and of a period of net negative emissions after net zero to claw our way globally back into a 1.5 degrees-ish world that had not been hugely acknowledged in the negotiations and certainly not in the political language agreed at COPs. And so the the new thing is to explicitly acknowledge that. But he's still talking in terms of keeping 1.5 alive, of making that overshoot period be as short as possible. And the two things that he's referencing are emissions reductions and negative emissions. And he's not, I mean, it's a fairly short interview. And so, of course, he doesn't get into the guts and the nitty-gritty of, well, how would you do this? But actually grappling with what the global net negative emissions push would look like, that's not where he's at or a lot of other people are at yet. And it doesn't necessarily look the same as the push to reduce emissions, which is also needed. You can't do enough carbon drawdown to avoid the need for the same scale of emissions reductions on only there's a little bit more room in the carbon budget if you have some repayments of carbon debt through drawdown down the track. But you still have to reduce emissions at a pretty fierce clip to be even in the zone where you can vaguely imagine that a global net negative emissions push could get you back into a 1.5-ish world. So that nitty-gritty, that's not in the discourse yet. Who pays for that? Where does it happen? What are the limits of what we can really expect to achieve through net negative emissions? There is other work on that. We've talked about work on that on this podcast before, but it's still a bit distant from the diplomatic discourse, and maybe it's drawing a bit closer now. But the everything involved in grappling with that overshoot scenario is hard. If you're dealing with a period which could be 20 years, it could be 50 years, where temperatures are exceeding your objective, there are consequences of that. And lots of people, lots of nations are going to bear those consequences, some more so than others. It really turbocharges both the adaptation and the loss and damage discussion. And impacts that are not going to be avoided through mitigation and are not going to be that successfully adapted to a bad story that people don't want to grapple with. But that's just one of the unlovely options that confronts us when we collectively, globally, have not mitigated fast enough to avoid those really, really hard choices. And as you say, Frankie, we will come to another one of those really, really hard choices in a minute.
So Guterres occupies this interesting position as UN Secretary-General and has really carved out a space for himself on this specific topic of climate change, which he's much more forceful on than any other previous Secretary-General, rhetorically fierce and unafraid to ratchet up the rhetoric as he tries to call out the reality that faces us around dangerous climate change. He's sort of inserting himself in this 1.5 is it alive or is it dead debate in a very, I think, considered way, and accelerating us to the bit where we're having the conversation of the trade-offs and options that we have before us. I think in previous goes around when this topic has come up, the question of moral hazard has loomed large, and the concern among some activists and observers of climate policy is where we talk about negative emissions or we talk about solar geoengineering, that it kind of takes the pressure off doing the thing that is the thing to do, which is actually just not put the freaking emissions into the air. But I actually wonder whether we're at a point now where we have to genuinely grapple with those difficult conversations to actually get everyone's head around how diabolical some of those alternatives are to just doing the thing.
Yeah.
Both in terms of the flow-on effects and in terms of the costs. I'm sort of coming to the view that this is actually a really helpful intervention because you're right, Tennant, like it was absolutely there in the global stock take. And close observers of this thing wouldn't be particularly surprised by anything that the Secretary-General has said. But if it accelerates like a more public conversation and grappling with those topics and those trade-offs, I think that's a valuable service, because the sooner that, there is literacy built around that, I think in a weird way it might drive us back to the mitigation conversation. Yeah. Because it is absolutely the least worst option that we have before us. It seems hard until you look at some of the other really hard shit that we would have to do if we don't do the mitigation, right?
And we only kind of, as you say, really are able to grapple with that when these topics start to be more mainstream in the discourse, where you've got like viable cost estimates for how much some of this technology is going to cost, or at least an understanding of actually just how early in the phase of R&D and experimental, phase some of this stuff is. And like, as we know from having such a focus on the mitigation side of tracking deployment rates of different technologies, like this, it doesn't happen overnight. And so, in a sense, maybe the sooner we can start to grapple with this in more detail, the sooner it's like, oh, yeah, okay, so we looked at the alternatives. Here's what's involved in that and all of the unknowns that throws up and the cost involved. Oh, and that bit around electrification of everything and energy efficiency starts to look pretty good, actually. Maybe just as a final thought, on his remarks, I think he's also conscious that he's only got another year, I think, or so left in his role as Secretary General. So, I mean, notwithstanding the fact that he's not really, in my view, left anything on the table in terms of rhetoric in the last few years. It was interesting in this interview, he said if he'd had his time again, he would have gone harder earlier in his term on climate. But that I think, he's not going to be in this role the next time NDCs are due to the UNFCCC around 2030. So, and I'm not a UN knower. I don't know who his successor is likely to be. So just, would we expect someone with a similar commitment, to the issue of climate inheriting that role? I think it's an important provocation at the right time.
One of his answers, I think he must have delivered with a little smile on his face when he was asked what he would change about the events of his term. And he said, I don't think I could change my decisions because the key decisions were not taken by me.
Yeah.
Yep. The UN Secretary General is a position that can have an influence on the discourse, but very little is actually within the Secretary General's control or capacity to decide. It's not how the UN works. So we will see what the successor is like, and they will have tricky ground to navigate, like on many topics. And we were talking a few episodes ago about the geopolitics of climate change. Good luck. Good luck to the next Secretary General and to us all.
Good luck to us all. Shall we chat about a report?
I'm eager. But are you, Luke?
I will eat my aerosols.
Doesn't have quite the same ring as vegetables, but...
Aerosolized vegetables? In molecular gastronomy, you can spherify a vegetable. Can you aerosolize it? I think some technical challenges with nozzle diameters would be on vegetable aerosolization would be eliminated by this paper.
Light mist of Brussels sprouts for Mr. Menzel on table 1.
With the global pace of emissions reduction not in line with what the science tells us is required to hold temperatures to 1.5 degrees above pre-industrial levels, radical rearguard actions are seeming ever more plausible. One that is oft discussed is solar geoengineering, the idea that humanity could commit to an ongoing program of injecting aerosols into the atmosphere that would reflect sunlight back into space and counterbalance the heating caused by climate change. This might sound like science fiction, but is an idea that has received a fair amount of attention in the literature. So how does the research that has been done to date stack up? That is the subject of a new scientific paper from Nature, which surveys the studies that have been done on this topic and considers what we should conclude about the feasibility of geoengineering as a strategy. In it, they find that research tends to be focused on relatively simplistic deployment modelling and that broader issues such as governance and supply chains have not been properly grappled with. Tennant, I don't think anyone would claim this short paper is the final word on this topic, but it didn't exactly fill me with confidence about the geoengineering gambit. What did you make of it?
So I think that this is a really interesting little piece of work. Little piece of work with what, 200 footnotes to other papers. It's
almost more footnotes than words. Actually.
Yes, maybe. And this is a topic that does cry out for something in the nature of the what in the world is going on with carbon removals paper that we've looked at before. And maybe that kind of summing up exercise will come from a body of the global great and good. But I thought this was a fascinating window into a topic that we have thought about looking at and often gone, it feels a bit distant from where we are. One of the very first papers that we considered discussing on this podcast, several years ago, was a paper, a global open letter, arguing for a moratorium on research, not just deployment, but research on geoengineering. And this paper, I think, is really interestingly awkward for both advocates of and opponents of considering geoengineering. Because what it's doing is gathering together quite a bit of the work that has been done on both modelling of the global atmosphere's circulatory systems and the plausible climate response to sticking crap in the upper reaches of the sky to slightly block out the sun, and look at both the physical impacts of different approaches to that and the engineering challenges involved in doing different versions of this. And what they're finding cuts against lots of narratives. So people who are keen on the idea of solar geoengineering, which is an idea that goes back a long way. If we think back to our time warp episode on the 1965 report to US President Lyndon Johnson about the quality of our environment, which had a portentous appendix on global climate change driven by carbon dioxide, 1965, the scientists who compiled that had a few geoengineering enthusiasts among them, and recommending investigation of blocking out the sun with sulfur particles. It had a lot more to say about that than about reducing emissions. But this work is suggesting that the process of putting sulfate, which is the most often discussed way of blocking out the sun a bit, because it's already done by sulfur air pollution and by volcanic eruptions, that can, of course, have some pretty serious side effects. That has led geoengineering curious people to suggest alternative varieties of crap to stick in the upper sky, including alumina or titanium oxide, or in the most guaranteed to be mocked in newspapers variant, powdered diamond.
I love that so much.
Oh my God. I particularly,
as lower risk.
Oh, well, I particularly just love the honest kind of attempt to put a projected cost figure into a table on that front, and just look
there
at.
might be some impacts on the market price of diamond from demand on this scale.
Oy.
Now they're talking industrial synthetic diamond.
Yes, but nonetheless,
They're not putting De Beers in charge of cleaning up the climate.
Oh, but wouldn't they love it?
What could be more timeless than the climate?
Okay.
So these materials have been suggested as lower risk things to grind up very fine and stick in an airplane and throw out the back of it while it flies ever so high. And so the work that is being summarized here establishes that there are some very serious engineering constraints on these non-sulfur materials that maybe you could solve, but they look like they would greatly inflate the cost estimates of designing and building and running a large fleet of aircraft to do that. And so, the geoengineering opposed might look at that and go, aha, there's no lower risk option. But the geoengineering interested would look at this and say, well, it's like sulfate's got these things that are well worth worrying about, like, damaging the ozone layer and, maybe speeding warming of the stratosphere, thus changing global circulatory patterns, changing weather patterns, maybe doing things we really don't want to do as side effects. But the research indicates there's riskier and less risky ways of doing this, and the least risky way of doing it seems to be a pretty globally coordinated approach where you have injection of whatever it is, A, very high up, like 20 kilometres up, but B, that you're doing it in multiple latitudes at the same time. So you're doing it not just at the equator or not just at the latitude where there happens to be a zany billionaire with an interest in
with a
aircraft.
A lot of shared diamonds.
Indeed. But all up and down the northern and southern hemispheres. And that way you get the most even impact, not overcooling the tropics, say. You make the least changes to the global hydrological cycle, adjusting like rainfall in places, though you still will change rainfall patterns, it appears, which people will have opinions about. It would all work less badly if a bunch of countries were clubbing together to do this. And so some people have, I'll wind up here, but some people have argued, as that open letter we considered a few years ago, have argued that the governance problem here is unsolvable and therefore you can't deploy geoengineering. And one of the implications of this work is governance problem. I mean, however hard it is, it's more responsive than physics. And physics says if you don't do this in a coordinated way, it's much more expensive and it's much riskier. More expensive because you'd need to have many, many more planes carting much, much more crap up into the stratosphere to dump it out the back. And yes, that on a spreadsheet might look comparatively cheap versus a global energy transition, as little as $10 to $20 billion per year. Some estimates have it, but actually it could be an order of magnitude more than that if you're doing it really badly. So have a look at how you might be able to get good, would be the most pro-geoengineering take on this work, which is just full of, this is not going to work as smoothly as people like to assume caveats.
So just to draw the curtain back a little bit, sometimes the three of us don't agree on what paper we should read for the pod.
I knew you were going to do this.
And look, there's a lovely little IRENA paper looking at the our progress towards tripling renewables and doubling energy efficiency by 2030 that will remain unsummed up for the ages. And the selling point for this paper, at least one of the selling points, was, Luke, it's really short.
It is really short.
Only 9 pages. It is really short. It's also incredibly dense. And I'm not a scientist, and it is very jargony. And while it is very short, I had to read it twice to get my head around it. I'll put my hand up and say that. However, it is quite interesting. And it underlined to me, like, this isn't even 4-dimensional chess. This is like 5-dimensional chess to get this right, because you've got all those physical systems of the Earth that you're interacting with and the things you're solving for in terms of the actual just deployment, in terms of, and they list them right, latitude, altitude, longitude, the magnitude, and also the season. It changes depending on the time of the year and where you are in the world. You've got to be thinking about all of those things. That's before you get to what you spent a bit of time talking about, Tennant, which is like what material you're using, and then overlaying the governance across all of that, and how one would, secure agreement from all those different parties around the world that would need to be on board to do this properly. I can imagine a scenario where shit was getting real enough that might be possible, but it's a pretty heavy lift, right?
I was so activated, like the engineer in me was so like positively activated by descriptions of different nozzle designs for dispersion of different aerosols.
Excited me less, Frankie.
Well, agree to disagree, Luke. So
I was thinking while I was reading this, is this what people that aren't policy people feel like when they read like really wonky policy papers? They're like, what the frick are these people talking about?
Yeah, kind of. But I was one of those people. Still am a little bit. I had the most thoughts about the questions this paper throws up on governance. But the other thing that I just wanted, I guess, to call out is also, and this kind of goes to, the three of us have been tracking the discourse around this, such as it's been over the last couple of years. We've seen kind of official side events started to be hosted at COPs with eminent experts and things like that. And there is a really important governance point I want to come back to there. But one of the other themes that had come up in these kinds of discussions as well is a lot of the work we're considering in this paper is based on is pretty much theoretical and modelled scenarios. There actually hasn't been a lot of any as well. I'm not sure if there's not any. I didn't manually check the 200 footnotes referenced in this paper, but there is very little experimental data available to support, some of the things being worked through there. And so, if you're thinking about the time from kind of what this paper is doing, which is kind of mapping the issues and considering some of the technical constraints and engineering constraints that need to be solved for, and drawing a line to like how you would actually deploy something like that. There's like a big missing chunk of work that hasn't happened yet. And it needs to be.
Given you're the resident engineer on the podcast, Frankie.
Sure.
Chief engineer of the Let Me Sum Up podcast. How would you even do that experimentation? Because one of the premises of this whole endeavour is to do it properly. You need to do it globally. And so is it like we just need to commit to it for 6 months and do our best and see what happens, and then I guess scurry back into our hole if it doesn't work out? I don't know.
I don't really know that's like just give it a go, guys, is going to cut it. in multilateral fora.
Yeah, sure, but like to actually test the theory.
No, I'm like, bear with me whilst I think of a way to invoke Tennant's equivalent of like the Bush lawyer scenario here, because I'm not like a practicing engineer.
What?
Okay, so an obvious scenario, right, is that you work with a jurisdiction that's open to this and do small-scale tests where you could say with a high degree of confidence that you're localizing like the impact of things like that. And the purpose of doing that, from my perspective, would be to check how well the model dispersion matches actual dispersion. So you're I guess you're validating what a model tells you about how certain currents, or like, however you design the experiment, and you would try to match as much of that design, if you like, to like the preferred kind of real world scenario. I think the only way you get to kind of as close as possible to the globe, the scale which is seeing you disperse stuff, at a high altitude across multiple jurisdictions, is either you could pick something that imitates that, like a more harmless thing that imitates or could imitate the dispersion.
Diamond dust.
Yeah, let's actually just use diamond dust as a test case, because that will clearly be harmless.
And fun.
Oh God. So like that's one, like, so you could try and pick something to model like the dispersion effects, but then the thing that you really want to test for is how well is it like reflecting the sunlight back and actually having an impact on temperature. So to a certain extent, I'm not sure that you can test the true kind of effects of this at scale unless what you commit to, and like I think the eminent scientists that have spoken to this on panels are supportive of the idea in general of there being some controlled experimentation of this. And, there are things that you can kind of imitate in lab setups. Like there are steps before putting jets up in the sky with diamond dust that you can take that give you experimental data.
Ian Fleming would have some fun with this.
Oh my God. I feel ridiculous with the words coming out of my mouth, but nonetheless, so there are various kind of things you could do experiment wise before you're getting to the point of dropping stuff out of planes that could reduce uncertainty.
There is real world data that takes a lot of pulling apart, but on the impacts that sulfate aerosols in the stratosphere have on global temperature from the natural experiment of massive volcanic eruptions that put a lot of crap into the upper atmosphere, and the not natural but not controlled either experiment of industrial civilization putting a lot of sulfur pollution at low levels, some of which winds up in the stratosphere as well. And those things have been cooling the planet while they last. The volcanic eruption matter settles out after a year or two. The sulfate, the sulfur pollution has been reducing in recent years thanks to very important, very necessary pollution control efforts in global shipping and in national environmental regulation, particularly in China, but other places too. Some people who are geoengineering enthusiasts will just go from that to, well, like, we know it works. So just, assume the can opener of a fleet of stratospheric sulfur spewing planes and we can do this. And the really useful perspective from this paper, I think, is there are, in fact, a lot of very important practical matters between the can this work at all conceptual level and the we have an actually functioning approach level, and those engineering challenges will hugely shape the cost and the effectiveness and the riskiness of the endeavour.
Yeah, and I'm glad you used that word, because that was something that I really liked about this paper, because it was coming at it from a risk framework. Like, there are inevitably risks from taking this approach, and they are multifactorial and range from physical risks right through to governance risks and everything in between. And, the question was asking itself, can they be effectively mitigated? And it doesn't come down definitively on that question, but it expresses a high degree of caution, I think, about being overly excited about solar geoengineering as the silver dust that is going to, solve climate change.
Well, if you want to create a positive argument for doubling down on renewables efficiency and electrification, just look at the cost of diamond dust getting shoved off in planes. But I mean, just to kind of come back to, I think maybe one of the central points in this paper is, as with a lot of climate action, in the end, it's going to be a hell of a lot more cheaper, equitable, just manageable if more, if more of the world is doing this together rather than not. I really do think it underlines the point here that if it's just a couple of rich northern hemisphere countries, and God, I can't stomach the thought of billionaires with too much time and money to do entering into this space. That's not actually that much of a viable pathway because of just the extra additional, and it's magnitudes of cost here that we're talking about. This is already a very expensive, in our early understanding of it, endeavour, let alone, then thinking about needing to focus it at kind of small scale with only a few countries. And I just think there are genuine, how is the rest of the world going to feel about that if a couple of countries start pumping things into the atmosphere? I just think you do need a level of consensus on something like this.
Okay, yes. But say two countries decided to do it. Say China and the US agreed. What would anyone else be able to do about it?
They're not going to shoot down the planes with those two countries involved. They'd need a Southern Hemisphere partner, maybe Australia. The third leg of the great global climate triumvirate.
But it's actually one of the main points I wanted to raise on the governance side of things, is they're assuming that a lot of the early work on this will be done in the Northern Hemisphere because of, technology, costs, etc. And all the conversations we've been plugged into around COPs have really emphasised the need for the Global South to be at the table from an equity perspective, but as it turns out also just from the efficiency of the solution actually having a positive effect here as well. So there's that kind of, there's that balance to be struck here, as there is with so many other aspects of climate negotiations as well.
So one spanner in the works of it's nothing but spanners all the way down on this proposal. But one thing that I didn't expect, and I'm sure few other people expected, is that whereas a fear had been that wealthy petrostates like the United States, which is coming out of its shell as an out-and-out petrostate these days, that they might say, oh, well, geoengineering is why we don't need to reduce emissions and it can be oil forever, just as some people genuinely are saying in the US oil industry, negative emissions, direct air capture is why we don't need to reduce emissions and we can have oil forever. The thing that wasn't expected is the emergence of a significant strain within right-wing politics in the United States that loathes geoengineering and believes that it is already being done, that is chemtrails. And the globalists are trying to poison the air we breathe with their geoengineering, and the result of that, like, that's not just some mixed fruitcakes on the internet. That's a movement that has convinced at least one US state legislature to ban geoengineering already, and is pushing the same idea in other bits of the US. Like the one thing that different strains of the US right seem to agree on is not doing anything about climate change. And when they say not anything, they mean not anything. Don't reduce emissions and don't do geoengineering and don't do adaptation either. Just full on. Ostriches don't actually stick their heads in the sand, but hey, that's a factoid that some pencil neck on Wikipedia told you. Heads in sand is a robust and masculine activity, apparently.
So one thing, or one risk, I suppose, that this paper didn't spend a lot of time on was the ongoing commitment you're making if you go down this pathway. Because if you start doing this and rely on it to any great degree, deciding you're going to stop at some point could be pretty catastrophic in terms of the impact.
Termination shock.
Yeah.
Yeah, right. And so the governance is not just the initial agreeing that the thing is going to happen, but the ongoing maintenance of it for decades, centuries, I don't know, however long it takes us to do all the things that will allow us to draw down the greenhouse gases in the atmosphere to the degree that we would be able to theoretically do a graceful off-ramp at some point in the future. So that seems like a pirouette on top of a birthday cake that is collapsing underneath us.
Yeah. Well, it's an and cost, not an or cost, right? Like we're sort of having this conversation, sort of not having to this point being clear that, like, we still need to do all the other stuff we've been talking about on the mitigation front, because this isn't a one and done, like clear out De Beers showrooms, grind up the crown jewels and, eject into the stratosphere and it's all good. Like, you got to keep doing it.
Go around Australia's brides and brides-to-be and say, sorry, it's time for you to make a contribution to the global fight against climate change. Hand it over.
Can you imagine? But, like...
Not a winning platform.
Not a winning platform. So, like, it's just, like, I guess it's got to be positioned as it's a buying you time strategy rather than something that we'd expect to be maintaining into the long term. And I guess there's other questions that throws up as well about, I imagine there could be unknown impacts from doing this for an extended period of time. Like, that's not even canvassed in this paper. Fine. I don't know if that's...
I'm sure we understand it well.
So many unknowns and questions, and it does feel like it's a huge gamble to be predicating our, ultimate success on.
So I guess that goes to the question I had for both of you, which is, do you align yourself with those who say, no, this is a waste of time. It's a distraction. It's taking valuable resources away from the things that we should actually be focused on. And we just need to get on with the mitigation side of things? Or is it like we need to explore all the things because we don't know exactly how everything's going to play out? We might be very grateful that we've, got this on the shelf ready to go. Or as you say, Frankie, at least understand how challenging it would be to make this work. And so are able to definitively set it aside.
I think I probably fall in the latter, but I do have a real concern about the opportunity cost of time and effort and expense. I mean, I have a question about that, right? Because what we're really calling for here is a focus on what is essentially like very early stage R&D kind of level stuff, and so it, you know, are the skill sets of the people that we want to look at this kind of more closely from a governance, from a technical constraints perspective, taking away from the workforce of people we need to be rolling out, you know, renewables and energy efficiency and electrification at scale? Like, I'm not sure is the obvious answer. Like, these things are happening at different ends of a spectrum. I'd be thinking about it as are we comfortable with this cannibalizing, you know, an amount of people's time that could be focusing on other kinds of drawdown as well? Because we do have, like, you know, like we've been talking about stuff like direct air capture. Like there's like a lot of other like kind of early stage tech that needs looking at too. And maybe the paper I want to see is the relative cost benefits, or, you know, just how much bang for buck could we get from a focused effort on scoping this thing out versus some of the other things in the, gee, I really hope I don't need to use this at some point in the future, but it feels like necessary to do due diligence on.
So I'm going to say, yes, I think that geoengineering, specifically through solar radiation management, specifically through sulfate aerosol injection to the stratosphere, is worth spending some time and money of talented people to look at all the aspects of the climate impacts of it, the side effects of it, the engineering challenges of it, in the knowledge that will take resources that could have been used on something else, and it will be misrepresented by some people of considerable bad faith and infinite short-sightedness as a reason why we don't need to do mitigation. The reason why, despite those things, it is worth at least looking at is where we started this episode. We're headed for a period of at least several decades of being somewhere above 1.5 degrees, and there is a lot of work on the profound negative consequences of that. Are we just going to experience those consequences, or are we going to try and shave off more of the worst of them, even at the cost of both money and the side effects that geoengineering will have? We are already sticking a bunch of sulfur into the stratosphere, and we're sticking a bit less every year for, as I said earlier, extremely good reasons of human health, reducing the burden of ground level or near ground level pollutants on populations around the world. But that is unfortunately taking the brakes a little bit off the warming that what we've already emitted is causing. And so, like, we are living in a world already where there is some impact on circulation, on the hydrological cycle from the half-assed, unplanned geoengineering we are doing. So the bottle is uncorked and the genie has been making it hard for us to breathe for some time. So, like, none of that is a very exciting picture, and, like, side effects are guaranteed, abuse is guaranteed. But I don't know that we've got a great basis for avoiding it, because mitigation alone we've not done enough of it. We need to do much more. We need to do the negative emission stuff too. We need to do the adaptation stuff too. And after all that, there's going to be impacts, though, that are otherwise not avoided. So we're probably going to have to give this a go, and certainly should understand slightly more about what the hell we're doing than we do today. Anybody going over the trenches yelling that? Probably not.
What do you think, Luke?
I think more information is good.
Team, more research is needed.
It supports better decision making. I'm not convinced that this is something we should be spending actual time on in terms of deployment, but one of the ways we make a good decision about that is by understanding it better. So
it's already cost the world an IRENA-focused podcast episode. What more will geoengineering take from us?
Yes. All right.
One thing I was going to say, we didn't get to it, and it's not in the paper, but if there is something in this space that is even more prone to be mocked than diamond dust, it is the people who say, oh, you don't want to be putting sulfur in the atmosphere, and that's why you need to fund my plan to put large volumes of satellites into space to form a sun shield beyond the Earth's atmosphere that will be much more controllable and safe and terrific to selectively block out the sun. And a large space program is entailed by that idea to start manufacturing these heliostats people get very excited about that, and other people say...
You mean people who want to manufacture heliostats and sell them to...
People who want to do cool stuff in space, a demographic we have heard about before and will again, no doubt.
As long as you're on this podcast, I am confident of that.
I have a love-hate relationship with those people.
As always, we close up the show with one more thing in which we all share something that is currently captivating our attention. Frankie, what have you got?
Well, I wanted to do a shout out to the about 150 people who showed up for Chaos Trivia last week at on the sidelines of All Energy, and do a big thanks to our friends at Currently Speaking and the NemChat singers. Like, how to paint a bit of colour to that picture. We promised chaos, and I think we delivered. The room was chockers and such a good vibe. Lots of familiar faces. I think obviously the three of us lunatics were in cosplay. That prompted a few questions from people about, like, someone said to Alex or Declan, like, oh, you guys like hired people to dress up. And they're like, okay, these guys are actually like serious energy professionals.
Somehow Alex and Declan just politely ignoring all of our collaboration on our cosplay in the WhatsApp app and not joining in.
Yeah, funny that. But
they never let us on.
No.
They never gave the impression that they would show up in any kind of cosplay.
This is true.
This
is true. But oh my goodness, like, what a great night. And I think I should shout out to the ultimate winners. Gee, there were some great trivia team names. But the winners had probably one of my favorites, which was No One Loves a Jen Taylor. And they wiped the floor with the competition in the last round in particular. So we did a round of classic trivia that the folks at Currently Speaking ran. And I certainly would have been able to answer most of those questions. That's for serious NEM nerds. And then...
serious AEMO pay packet watchers too.
Yes. Yeah. And then there was an especially chaotic round cooked up primarily by one T. Reid. But how would you like to characterise what it was that we embarked on with the audience there?
A dizzying adventure through time and space to halt climate change as one of the time commandos through answering trivia questions.
That's yes. I think it was like the nerdiest climate themed choose your own adventure with your 150 of your closest friends type version of a game. It was pretty great. And then we finished with a round of heads or tails and, high stakes. I think the good lad Andrew, who was the volunteered tribute from his team to play heads and tails. What was his moniker there, Tennant?
I named him Andrew, the Iron Wonk.
Brought it home for them. But it was mostly just a lovely evening full of friendly faces, sharing a lot of good chats and good fun. And importantly, just want to thanks to those people who bought a ticket, because all the proceeds went to the First Nations Clean Energy Network, and it was pretty great to support those fabulous folks doing very important work.
And a big shout out to the pit crew as well, because we had Maddie on the front door, and we had my daughter Eleanor selling merch, and we had, of course, Mark Spencer from Here Media Studios.
That's right.
Editor of this here pod.
The one, the only.
Indeed. Playing all kinds of roles over the course of the evening and just being an all-around good sport. So thanks for everyone that pitched in.
It was pretty great.
And we might even be back next year. Who knows?
With, I think, a bigger room and slightly better acoustics. But yes.
We live and learn. Tennant, what have you got?
So I've got another goddamn rant about artificial intelligence and data centers.
Oh, here you go.
Which is just to say, every time I turn around, or more specifically, every time I go to an electricity network customer council meeting, and I go to quite a lot of those, the number and gigawatt rating of data centers seriously proposed in Australia goes up. The other day, I learned that in the service area of one Victorian distribution network, they regard 2.5 gigawatts of data centres as either in flight for delivery now or very likely to be confirmed and constructed over the next 3 years or so. That network is planning to quadruple their total capital expenditure largely to service the needs of data centres. And every other distribution network and transmission network in Victoria and New South Wales in particular has similar levels of project demand emerging. And if these things happen and big prepayments are being made, major take or pay agreements are being signed, it implies that total electricity demand in the national electricity market would go up somewhere between 50 and 80 terawatt hours per year over the next maybe 3 to 5 years. Today, that demand is 180 terawatt hours. And so there are some questions about the feasibility of this and the impacts of this. There's also the question of, is it going to happen at all? Is data center investment going to evaporate in a puff of, oh, that was a bubble? Big deal if it does. That will have some consequences. If it doesn't evaporate and these data centers are built, the networks, as far as I can see, are doing very sensible things to try to protect the rest of their customers from overpaying for the delivery of infrastructure for these new players. But where are the electrons coming from? There is a lot of work going into just replacing supply from retiring coal. Do we have? I know there's an allowance for data center related growth in the latest electricity statement of opportunities, but that growth is pretty stately compared to what is coming forward from these on the ground proposals. And can we retire the coal if the electricity demand is going up by 50 terawatt hours in the next 3 to 5 years? Might be a time for some deep thinking, some if you're coming in, you're bringing your own new clean generation type requirements, and some very regular checking back in on the state of all this, because if it's actually happening and for real, this is much bigger, much faster than any changes being wrought by electrification in that time frame. And yikes.
Yikes indeed. All right. For my one more thing, I am going to give a shout out to a sadly neglected little paper from our friends at Irina. Delivering on the UAE consensus, tracking progress towards tripling renewable energy capacity and doubling energy efficiency by 2030.
Sounds terrific. Why didn't you bring it up before, Luke?
What wonders, what insights would have been generated had we summed up this report? We will never know. But I can give you a couple of headlines in the short time available to us at the arse end of the podcast.
If you grind up that paper very finely and put it in the stratosphere, it will spread its wisdom across the world.
So there's sort of some reasonable news on the renewables front. So obviously tripling renewables by 2030 off a 2023 baseline is the goal on the supply side of the ledger, and we're doing okay. We are on target for 10.3 terawatts of renewable capacity. The goal is for 11.2 terawatts. That's assuming that the 15% growth that was achieved in 2024 continues. We can get to the 11.2 if we increase that up a notch to 16.6%. So there is a plausible pathway to victory there. That's the good news. The bad news is we're completely tanking on energy efficiency. We're targeting a 4% improvement each year to double energy efficiency improvement. The global average for many years has been around 2% a year. We're setting about 1% in 2023, 2024, and the poor performance in the first couple of years since this target has been set means we have to really pick up the pace if we're going to get anywhere near our 2030 target. We need to be ramping up to at least 5% a year. Between 2025 and 2030, which is pretty disappointing, but also a rallying cry as we head into COP30 in Belém. I think there's going to be a lot of talk around both the renewable side of the ledger and the energy efficiency side of the ledger, and what is working or not working on both of those fronts. And I think underlines the value of the targets that were committed to by many nations over the course of that COP28 and ultimately made it into the UAE consensus because it gives us something to track and something to hold ourselves accountable for and an opportunity to do something about it where we're not where we need to be. So, Irina paper, I committed to you. You'll have to read it because we didn't.
Oh, it's pretty interesting.
So filthy.
And within the renewables bit, solar is globally going absolute gangbusters. Wind, I think we already knew this, but wind's had a bad couple of years. The pace of solar growth is making up more or less for the slowing of wind growth. And then everything else is batteries are very big, but everything else in the renewable space is pretty titchy at this point. It is about solar and wind, and yeah. Well, we'll have to see what happens on those efficiency stats once these data centers have had their way with it. If they're telling the truth about the amount of economic growth they support, then the economic energy intensity figure will be really good, but primary energy will probably not be.
All right, we're almost done. But every fortnight after the show, we record a bonus episode called There Is Too Much, in which we kick back, relax, and cover something we didn't have time for on the main show. And we are working our way through these 6 sectoral plans. 3 down, 3 to go. We're covering our 4th this week. Tennant, what are we covering and who are we covering it with?
We're covering a subject close to my heart and day-to-day job, which is industry. What is the game plan for cleaning up manufacturing and waste is in this plan as well. And who better to accompany us on a journey through a future of not-so-smoky smokestacks than sometime co-host, friend of the pod, Alison Reeve of the Grattan Institute, who will have many thoughts.
She will indeed. In fact, she got the pick We said to her, which one do you want?
That's right. Should we be admitting that we play favourites? I think we can with Alison.
I think it's pretty clear to all of our listeners. Alison is one of our favourites. So, yes, she got the pick of the sector plans and she chose industry, so no doubt has some thoughts to share. Of course, that content is behind the paywall. There are two ways to access it. You can go to letmesumup.net, click on support LMSU at the top of the page, access our Patreon via that route. You'll get bonus episodes. You'll also get cosplay photos and various other frivolity. But if you happen to be a Apple Podcast user and you wish to keep your life simple and all you care about are the episodes, you can, of course, subscribe via that channel as well. All right, that is our show for today. This podcast was edited by energy professional and podcast tragic Mark Spencer from Here Media Studio. Frankie, as well as dressing up as Dorothy and moonlighting as a professor, you also like promoting things. What would you like to promote today?
I'm about to slip on the trench coat and hat to become international woman of mystery that travels to Belém with you fine folks. And I think it's a timely reminder to our listeners that we talk about stuff at COP. We like to give you reports from on the ground. We usually record an episode or two while we're over there, so we will be doing that. And while we haven't agreed this specifically yet, maybe there'll be some BOCO along those lines produced on grounds at COP. So just anyway, not over. I think I've just overpromised you.
I was doing some episode planning on the weekend, and there will be no shortage of content.
I think it's fair to say, and if I have my way as a global VP for extortion, in particular, some of that will be behind the paywall. So don't delay. Go over and support us on the Patreon. Okay.
All right, go do that. Go do it now. But for Frankie Laskovich and Tennant Reid, I'm Luke Menzel. Thanks for listening, and we'll talk to you again soon.